Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Glen Chapman, and I was asked by my good friend Dr. Jessica Ash if I might say something about English grammar. Now, I am a linguist. I deal predominantly in the areas of teaching academic English to speakers of other languages. And our talk today is going to be on what I am calling the strange world of English verbs. I'm going to discuss with you how English uses verbs in different sentence patterns, and how these very same words used as a verb in one sentence can actually become nouns, adjectives, and adverbs in other sentences. So let's get started. So before we start learning about different English sentence patterns and the strange world of English verbs, I thought we would take a moment first to talk about learning. It actually occupies a great deal of my time collecting data and thinking about how we actually learn language. And it's my opinion that the only thing we do learn is language. We can memorize facts or we can practice a task, but when it comes to learning something deeply, language is probably, at least in my opinion, the only thing that we genuinely learn. So let's take a look at the 4 skills that we need in order to be proficient in a language. First, there's listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Listening is a physical as well as an emotional effort that we make, so it's a physical act. I call it emotional as well because a lot of what we listen to we may not actually pay attention to, nor are we necessarily interested in hearing what it is that is going on around us. Speaking is also a physical act. Reading and writing these are cognitive skills. So these are things that we learn and these are tasks that we can perform. Then there is the idea of translation. So when we are learning a second language, we're at least in the beginning, we are translating from our first language into the second, or from our second language into our first. So this actually has quite a cognitive load. It takes a lot of concentration, and it takes away from the other things that we can actually concentrate on. So this actually takes a great deal of effort as well, the translation part of learning a second language. And then there's the idea of processing. The amount of time it takes to process from our first language into our second, and our second language into our first. But there are differences in these particular skills. So we would have to know the difference between knowledge that and knowledge how. So knowledge that, we can look at that kind of learning as facts and figures. So we know what the capital of France is, or you certainly know what the name of your mother is, and these are the data, or these are the facts that we have been told or that we know is true. And then we have knowledge how. Knowledge how is a little different. This is where we learn how to swim or how to play a musical instrument. So these are things that we have to be shown and then we have to practice. So when it comes to listening and speaking, that is knowledge how. When it comes to reading and writing, that is knowledge that. And so when we get into these verbs, understand that there's a difference between reading and writing in a language or listening and speaking in that very same language. So let's take a look at positive transfer, the idea of positive transfer. When it comes to subject, verb, object, which English is considered a subject, verb, object language. It's the most common kind or the most common pattern of sentence in English. And the example that I like to give deals with Chinese learners of English. They have very little difficulty in understanding the subject, verb, object order of English sentences because it corresponds with a Chinese structure. So it's simple for a Chinese learner of English to express the idea of 我爱你, which means I love you. I love you is subject, verb, object. So positive transfer is when your first language actually can be used directly to understand the grammar of a second language. No language is going to be exactly the same as far as grammar and transfer as to your second language, but our first language is actually the imprint on us to understand all language. So if you're not very good with grammar in your first language, you're going to have to learn grammar in order to learn a second language. So these are our sentence patterns. The sentence patterns in English, there are 7 of them, not to be confused with sentence types. These are types of sentence, but sentence types are considered something different in English grammar. But there are 7 of them. Subject verb, very basic type of English sentence. It's not used that often, but it is used. We have to start somewhere. Then there is subject verb object. English is considered a subject verb object language. And subject verb object object, where we can have multiple objects after our verb in the predicate of our sentence. And then there is subject verb complement. Now when it comes to subject verb complement, you will probably see that word differently than the way it is normally spelled. A complement, all it is additional information about the subject. It modifies the subject, it renames the subject, it gives you additional information about the subject. That's what a complement does. And the subject-verb complement sentence pattern is very easily found because the verb actually tells you whether or not you're looking at subject-verb-object or subject-verb complement, and we'll get into that a little bit later. We can have subject-verb-object complement and then subject-verb-object adverbial as well as subject-verb adverbial. And I'll give you some examples of these types of sentences. So we're going to talk about verbs. Before we get into the sentence patterns, let's talk about what a verb is. Every English sentence must have a verb. Verbs can show states of being. These are verbs that show no action. Verbs can show action as well as necessity and possibility. When you think about possibility, you should probably think about certainty or uncertainty about something that has happened in the past or something that has happened in the future. Action verbs show manner of motion and or path. So English verbs, there are 2 different classes, and we'll get into those 2 different classes. But verbs show both the way something moves or the way something is done versus the path that it takes. And we'll get into that a little bit later as well. Verbs place the scene within a time frame, and the way in which we do that is through tense. Verbs must agree with the subject, and that requires conjugation. English requires conjugation. And so these are the basic facts about English verbs. So here are the verb categories. So we can have linking or action verbs, linking or helping verbs, modal verbs, and phrasal verbs. Now, a linking verb has no action involved. It's more of a state of being. Action verbs show how an object moves. There's action involved. There are a great number of verbs that can be used both as linking verbs and as action verbs, and I'll show you some examples of that. Helping verbs, the verb to be, the verb to have, or the verb to do, these help us in English to place a tense on the subject to show the lack of action or to show emphasis. And then there's the modal verbs. Modal verbs is about necessity or uncertainty. So that's how we use modal verbs. And then there are phrasal verbs. English has verbs from Latin and French and some other languages, and we have verbs from German and Old English. Old English and German verbs can use particles, where we have a one word that is used for the verb and a different word that is used for the particle. And I'll explain that a little bit later as well. But there are differences, I must say, between verb usage in British English and the verb usage in North American English. This presentation here explains verb usage in North American English. So here we are with our sentence examples about the different ways we can organize, and these are sentence patterns in English. The first one, the most basic, is subject-verb. Jessie laughed. All English sentences have to have a verb, and all English sentences must have a subject. Other languages could omit or not include the subject, or they could omit or not include the verb, but in English we have to include both. Number two, we have Jessie laughed at Glen. So we have a subject, we have a verb, and then we have an object. So Glen actually receives the action of the verb. Jessie is the one doing it, but Glen is the one receiving it. So we know that that is an object. Number three, Jessie made Glen angry. So we have a subject, we have a verb, we have an object, but now we have a complement. So now we come across this idea about more information about the subject? No. In this case, the complement is actually closer to the object than it is to the subject. So the complement here is actually describing the object rather than the subject. So is Jessie angry in this sentence? No. It's Glen that is angry in this sentence. Number four, Jessie gave Glen a present. So we have multiple objects in that sentence. Number five, Jessie put the bag down. So we have an action verb, put. We have an object, bag. And now we have down. Down is actually giving us additional information about the verb. It's an adverb. It's an adverbial that is telling us the direction in which the thing was put. And in this case, it was put down. Number six, here we have Glen is tall. Now, how do we know this is subject-verb complement? Well, the easiest way to recognize this as subject-verb complement is from the verb. The verb here is a form of to be. It's a state of being verb. So Glen is tall, which Glen is tall, I am tall, but Jessie doesn't make me angry. So these are just examples. Glen is tall. Tall is a better description, or it's a renaming of our subject. So since we have a verb that is a linking verb or a state of being verb, we realize that this is not subject-verb-object, but subject-verb complement. And then number seven, Jessie sat up, where it's subject-verb adverbial, where up shows how Jessie is sitting. Did Jessie sit up? Did she sit down? Did she sit beside? Did she sit under? She sat up. That is the direction that she went. Now we're going to be talking about verb tenses. English has 12. That seems like a lot, and I understand it seems like a lot. Some languages have more, some languages have far fewer, but in English we have 12. The good news is, academically, we really only use 4. Simple present, present perfect, simple past, and the simple future. I'm not saying you don't have to learn all 12 of them, but the vast majority of academic writing is using these 4. So here are some examples of verb tenses. Now, it's very important to understand that we have 12, And these 12 can be used in different ways, telling a story, speaking to someone, but academically speaking, according to some corpus research that I have done, in academic writing, the three tenses that we use the most is the simple present, the simple past, and present perfect. We do use the simple future, and we do that particularly when we are writing proposals about research that we are going to do in the future. But for the most part, we use these four. But again, it's really important to understand all of them, particularly when we are reading literature or when we are speaking to people. Now, we did speak for a moment about the difference between an action verb and a linking verb, and how these verbs could actually be the same word. Here is a few linking verb sentence examples. So, my father looked angry. She felt excited about her new car. That man appeared on television. My meal tasted spicier than usual. Or the new president remains untested. Now, if we look at the verbs in these sentences, looked, felt, appeared, tasted, or remain, we realize that there's no action in these sentences. So if there isn't any action, what kind of sentence pattern are we looking at? You can decide for yourself. Now here are some examples using the very same verbs, but these are examples of sentences using action. Look in the backyard for the shovel. I felt on the floor for my lost keys. The man appeared suddenly right in front of me. Taste this for me, please, and remain where you are. These sentences show action. The previous sentences showed no action. So we have to be careful about the difference between linking verbs and action verbs. Here we have some examples of helping verbs. Helping verbs, for the most part, are talking about tense. We're talking about when something happened, and that's when you're going to have to concentrate on learning all of our 12 verb tenses. But some examples. I am walking to the store. That's happening right now. She was having a good time. That is something that happened in the past, but we're actually talking about it as though it is happening in the present. They had run from the scary dog. That is something that happened in the past. We had been thinking. That is something that happened in the past, but we're actually talking about it as though it is continuously happening right now. And then we have the boss does make changes. Here I'm going to have to talk about the meaningless or the light verb to do. Now, the verb to do is used differently in British English when responding to a question. So, if I ask you the question, are you coming to the party? In North American English, you would say, I might. That shows uncertainty. But in British English, they would say, I might do. Now, the do on the end of that sentence is completely meaningless. We don't really need it there. But do, for the most part, is a meaningless or a light verb. We use it plenty of times in North American English, since I gave you an example of it right here. Now, in this sentence, I can say the boss makes changes, which is a perfectly legitimate sentence. But when I say the boss does make changes, I am adding emphasis to the making of changes. So do isn't meaningless. It does add emphasis to our sentences. And it is used differently in British English than it is used in North American English. But as far as helping verbs are concerned, for the most part, they're used for the different tenses that we have. So we're going to have to talk about some different language families because we're going to be talking about phrasal verbs or multi-word verbs. So there are two different language families we'll talk about: satellite-framed languages and verb-framed languages. Now, satellite-framed languages such as Mandarin or German or English, they use a verb to describe the manner of the action or the way the action happens. And the path of that action, the path that an object takes, is often shown with a particle. And I'll give you some examples of that. So an English phrasal verb. So go is our verb and in is our particle. So go in means we have the manner, that is, something is going, and then we also have the path. It's going in. We can have go down, go out. We can discuss these verbs in many different ways, and we can have many different particles at the end. Now, I understand that you're probably looking at these particles, and you think in, down, out, those look like prepositions. And for the most part, that's the way they're used to show how something else is in relation to our subject. But in this case, the particle is helping the verb with the path of an object. Verb-framed languages, on the other hand, Korean, Romance languages, Arabic, they do not use particles at all. And so some of the people who are first language users of those verb-framed languages have a lot of trouble with particles in English phrasal verbs. So the French verbs entrer, descendre, and sortir, these mean go in, go down, and go out. But it's a single word. It shows both the path and the manner in which something is done. So phrasal verbs are unique. It's not used in a lot of languages, but that particle that looks like a preposition, it's actually a part of the verb. Here's where things might get a little difficult. We're going to talk about a group of words called verbals. Gerunds, participles, and infinitives belong to a class of words called verbals. Now, these words are based on a verb's action, but actually serve a different grammatical function altogether. Gerunds, participles, and infinitives can actually be used as nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. And I'll show you how. Here we're going to talk about our first class of verbals called the gerund. Now, gerunds look like present continuous or progressive verbs, but they're actually nouns. Here, let me show you the way you can tell the difference between them. As a verb, the present continuous verb has this ing ending on it. But that's not the only way you know it's a verb. Because this verb requires a helping verb, the verb to be, to put it in the correct tense, you can see this sentence is, I am running to the store. You know this is something that is happening right now. It's continuously happening right now. This word running in this sentence is not a gerund. A gerund is a noun. So in this, running is a present continuous or progressive verb. If it's being used as a noun, it is a gerund. Let's look at some examples. As nouns in a subject, swimming. Swimming is her favorite sport. As the subject, the activity of swimming, not physically swimming right now, is used as a noun. As a direct object, the kids love my cooking. Cooking is not something that's happening right now. There's no helping verb, so it's being used as a noun, in this case as a direct object. Object of a preposition. I have gotten many compliments on my dancing. Dancing is the object of a prepositional phrase. You can tell the prepositional phrase begins because we have a preposition right there. So, that's three ways to use a gerund. What is the last way? As a subject complement. Now, we have spent some time about subject-verb complement, and what is the thing that we can recognize a sentence pattern as subject-verb complement, and it's from the verb. So if we look at this sentence, my favorite sport is skiing, how do we know that it is subject-verb complement? We know because this is a linking verb. So My favorite sport is skiing. Skiing has to be a noun here. It's the activity that you're talking about. No one is, I am skiing, or she is skiing. She is not the subject of this sentence. My favorite sport. It is skiing. That isn't a grammatically correct sentence in English. So, my favorite sport is skiing is SVC. And we know that skiing is the complement of our subject because of the linking verb. Sentence patterns can help us with grammar quite a bit. Now we have the participle. A participle, aside from being a very strange word to say, a participle is a verbal which functions as an adjective. Participles most often end with the letter ing or ed. Now, the term verbal indicates that a participle, like the other two kinds of verbals, is based on a verb. Since they function as adjectives, participles only modify or continue to describe nouns and pronouns. Adjectives only describe or only modify nouns and pronouns. So participles are used as adjectives. Let's look at this a little bit deeper. So there are two types of participles. There's the present participle and the past participle. Present participles end in ing. They always end in ing. They may look like present continuous verbs, just like gerunds did, but these are actually adjectives, and I'll show you how to tell the difference. Past participles, on the other hand, they can end in ed, en, dt, n, or an e. Why? Because we have a lot of irregular verbs in English. Remember, it's a Germanic language, and so our past participle verbs can actually end very differently. So as a noun, we can take a look at what a gerund is. So I am better at batting than fielding. Now, this centers around baseball, my favorite sport. But we know that these are nouns because they're activities. We're not talking about someone doing them right now. We're talking about a noun. And so we know that this particular participle is not an adjective, but it is a noun. Therefore, it is a gerund. As an adjective, if we look at our example here, canned ham is disgusting. Now, where is our subject? Our subject is ham. Now, how is ham described? Well, I don't know. Let's take a look at the verb first. The verb. Is the verb an action verb? It is not. The verb is actually a linking verb. So we know now that we have subject, verb. So how is the subject being described? It's being described two different ways. Where is the ham from? The ham is actually in a can. So it is canned ham. Canned describes ham. So this actually modifies our subject. And since it modifies a noun, what is it? An adjective. What about disgusting? Does disgusting describe the ham? Yes, it does. But this ends in an ing. Also, we have a past participle here, and we have a present participle here, and both of them are describing the subject. So we know that these are not past tense verbs. We know that they're not gerunds. We know that they're participles, adjectives. Let's take a look at the next one. That broken computer is garbage. So what is our subject? Computer. Where's our verb? It is another linking verb, isn't it? It's is. So if we're talking about how the subject is being described, how is it being described? It's being described as broken because it ends in en. It's also described as garbage. What is garbage? Garbage is a noun, just like disgusting. Is disgusting a noun? No. Is canned a noun? No. Batting and fielding is, and therefore we can describe our subject with another noun. That's interesting. Garbage here is a noun, but is being described. It's describing our subject. English grammar can get so complicated sometimes. It can be used in a verb phrase. I am bringing the dog home. So what is our verb? Our verb is am, another linking verb. So as a verb phrase, I am bringing the dog home. Is this a participle or is this a verb? It's a verb. You know it's a verb because it's using a helping verb to show tense. He was brought home in a box. Is that a verb? It is a verb. It's a verb because we're using the past tense was to describe brought. Now, is that a past participle? Better believe it is. It ends in a T, just like that one does up there. So, a noun, batting and fielding, a gerund. As an adjective, either as an ed ending or as an ing ending, it describes our subject. But as a verb, what does it always need to have? It always needs to have a helping verb, some form of to be, either in the present tense or the past tense. So here we have our last verbal. It is the infinitive. Now the infinitive is the definition of many of our action verbs in English. An infinitive is a verb that functions as a noun. It can function as an adjective or as an adverb. It functions as an adverb in order to express an opinion, as the purpose of an object or action, or to answer questions like who, what, where, how, to what extent, or why. So let's look at the infinitive. Is when we talk about action verbs in English, there's always a to in front of it. So to swim or to run or to think. When we talk about action verbs, to goes in front of the verb. It tells you that it's an action verb, but also it shows it as the infinitive or the base verb. In this instance, the infinitive can be used several different ways. So as a noun, I like to run. So what is the object of this sentence? I like to run. This is subject, verb, object, correct? The object in this sentence is to run. We're talking about an infinitive as a noun here. To fly a plane is her dream. So we have, where is our infinitive? To fly. It's actually the subject of our sentence. Now, are we talking about someone flying? No. To fly is just the activity. It's just the noun. Much like a gerund would be. So, to fly a plane is her dream is the subject of our sentence, and it's also an infinitive, a noun. As an adjective, we can say, the team to watch is the Bengals. I'm from Cincinnati, and I put Bengals in there, but don't watch the Bengals. They're not very good. The team to watch is the Bengals. To watch is describing what? It's describing the Bengals. So it is an adjective. It is describing the Bengals as a team to watch. And then we have an adverb. To make homemade pasta, you must form a well. Now, this is a little more difficult to explain. We talked about answering questions about who, what, when, where, why, and how. As the adverb in this sentence, it's an adverbial phrase, right? You must form a well. How do we do that? Why do we do that? Where do we do that? Are one of those questions answered elsewhere in the sentence? Yes, it is. Why do we form a well? To make homemade pasta. To make homemade pasta actually answers the question why you form a well. So it's actually an adverb. So an infinitive, to sum up, an infinitive can be used as a noun as an object, a noun as a subject, an adjective, or as an adverb. I know, we didn't have a whole lot of time together, and you didn't get to ask me any questions. Here's my email and my Twitter handle. Feel free to ask me questions about this or any other topic on English grammar. And Dr. Jessica Ash, she'd be happy to help you as well. And in case you didn't realize it, you can go down and hit that like button, and you can actually get more videos on how to learn English as an academic language and so much more. Again, I have enjoyed this time. I have enjoyed being here. And if you have any questions for me or from Jessie, just give us a ring. Thanks.